This is The Shift Stories of Resistance and Resilience, a multi platform conversation series produced and hosted by Travis Rivera, the professional storyteller. I believe that we must embrace the power of stories to create a more inclusive world. So, this series aims to share perspectives, insights, and stories from professionals around the world about the role that resistance and resilience plays in our personal and professional lives. So, tune in, listen up, take notes, and recognize our shared humanity. This is The Shift. Hello, beautiful people. It wouldn't be a Travis Rivera show without some technical difficulties. So, if you're listening to this recording, you may have missed that there was no live stream on Tuesday, March 18th. Um, I don't know what's going on with technology, but we shall overcome. We are using a different platform right now. So I'm super, super excited. So, hello, everyone who's tuning in. My name is Travis Rivera. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the CEO and founder of The Professional Storyteller, where I embrace the power of stories to create a more inclusive world. And I do that through five pillars of activities: choreography, coaching, consulting, speaking, and writing. And I am based in Atlanta, Georgia, but I am by way of Jersey. I'm a Jersey boy, and I'm super, super excited to be joined by today's guest. I feel like I know them. I feel like they're such because I'm such a fan of their work and I just follow them and I've been following them for years that I didn't realize we had never met until today, until we had this conversation. So it's kind of funny how social media can make you think you know somebody or make you feel like you know them or that you guys are connected in some way. I guess it is because you are connected in some way, but it's just interesting how that kind of warps the way we build community in today's day and age. And so I'm super, super, super excited. And I'm going to start by reading their bio. Araya Baker is a counselor, suicidologist, and policy analyst. For over a decade, Araya Baker, they them theirs, has contributed to social justice and human rights movements, primarily by lending support to people over profit-oriented artists coalitions, faith communities, political campaigns, nonprofit organizations, research centers, think tanks, and public school systems. Araya's advocacy and public scholarship have been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Teen Vogue, Huffington Post, Psychology Today, Education Post, Vice, BuzzFeed, and The Tennessean, among other outlets. Essence Magazine, Native Son Now, and The Mighty have also recognized Baker's activism. Baker's mental health advocacy, in particular, has included collaborations with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Trevor Project, and Mental Health America, as well as public schools, public health organizations, historic Black civic organizations, and intersectional LGBTQ and feminist cultural centers. Baker holds a master's in professional counseling from the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education, where they received the Award for Excellence in Promoting Diversity and Inclusion, and a master's in human development and psychology from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where they served as an equity and inclusion fellow. And they are my guest today on The Shift. Welcome, Araya.
Hi. It's great to finally be meeting you.
Yes, it's so great to meet you. They always say you should be careful with the people you meet and admire because you hope that they don't, disappoint you once you get to meet them. And I know I wouldn't be disappointed by you because you are just so genuine. And I read your amazing bio and some of your professional highlights, but I want to know, who are you outside of those highlights?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to thank you for asking that question because I don't often get asked that. It's more so when it comes to interviews or, panels, questions about the work. But who I am really factors into the work. So when it comes to describing who I am outside of the work, I would say first and foremost, I consider myself a caretaker. Like, regardless of whether I'm taking care of kids, babies, plants, animals, elders, I feel like that's something that's core and essential to my spirit. And I'm sure we'll talk about like gender and like trans issues later on. But I feel like that is one of the first realizations that I had about myself, where I realized that it wasn't just toxic masculinity that didn't necessarily resonate with me. There were core aspects of masculinity itself that I was just like, wait, I'm seeing all these examples of, really caring and soft men around, soft-hearted men around me. And that's not what the world defines as masculine. What's going on here? Um, so I would say a caretaker first and foremost. Even when I'm far away from family, far away from friends, I still try to incorporate care and caregiving into my life and the things around me, whether it be a garden or something in my environment. The other aspect of that would be fairness. I feel like when I think about my childhood, that's something that came up time and time again, this sense of fairness that maybe came from being forced to do things that I didn't really want to do and forced to be, versions of who people wanted me to be that didn't really quite fit me and feeling this sense of unfairness. But I think over time, as I stepped into my identities, that even extended to people going through things that I hadn't experienced before, the emotion of unfairness, not just like this idea of what's unfair, but like the feelings that come up when you're in a situation where you feel shortchanged, you feel silenced, you feel, overlooked, cast aside. And so I feel like I've always sort of been attuned to justice stuff. Like even as a kid, really interested in the civil rights movement. And that's the one thing that could get my attention is like hearing about like a leader who not just stood up for something, but who like also sacrificed for, in terms of like popularity or money or whatever, attention to like really stand firm on their principles.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would say is just like rooted. Like right here, I have like a bunch of right above me, like family photographs.
Oh,
And so I've become the person in the
are there any baby Araya photos?
there's not any of me here, but there's lots of my parents and grandparents that I won't even show. They'd be embarrassed.
Oh,
Um, but yeah, as I've gotten older, I've become sort of like the family archivist.
oh, I love that.
Yeah. So whenever there's a special occasion, like, like a wedding or a birthday or God forbid a funeral, just something where people want to pay respect to someone in the family, they're like, oh, I know he has a photo. Let me text him, scan the photos. And so I'm the person who's sort of like the memory keeper or like the timekeeper. And so for me, I think it's really important to actually, there is a small photo.
Oh, oh, is that in Philly?
I think that might be in Philly or maybe DC.
Oh,
And so for me, like seeing photos of my family and ancestors is really grounding because it lets me know that I've been hundreds of years in the making, like thousands of years in the making across generations. People were intentionally, making choices, hoping that like somewhere down the line, someone would come along that would sort of break generational curses.
mm,
And I think it's important we can talk about this when it comes to just like ways that people can feel like they're contributing to movements and pouring into themselves. But I feel like it's really important to know that like you're not the first person in your lineage to sort of break family curses, to, do things differently, to envision a different way. And so I try to like balance innovation with preservation of the past and like making history relevant today in terms of my personal life. So that's who I am, I think.
I love that. That's probably one of the most insightful answers to that question I received in the entire duration of this series. It was so insightful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Usually people just say, I'm a uncle, or auntie, or I'm a sibling, or I'm a lover, or whatever. But you I love that you are the caregiver and the archivist of your family. That is beautiful. And I think that also really falls in line with you as a writer, right? Because you are preserving these stories and these memories that
Hmm.
a writer might forget what happened 10 minutes ago, but we will remember things from years ago and the pain
Listen,
we felt, right? And we will evoke that when necessary.
listen.
And so I think that makes a lot of sense to me that you as a storyteller are also the archivist and the preserver of your family's lineage. That's beautiful. I want to dive into this question. We asked this question of every guest, which is, what is your personal concept of
Hmm.
resistance and resilience?
Yeah, that question to me still goes back to lineage for whatever reason, except now I feel like expanding it beyond just blood family. And I feel like that's a really important part of it. As queer folks, as trans folks, we know that family is this expansive concept for us. It's not something that's just about who raised you or, who shares genes with you. Because as we all know, you can grow up with people in the same household and feel like they don't understand you at all, right? And then you can meet someone halfway across the world who has had similar lived experience, and you're like, oh my gosh, like it feels like there's some alignment here of why I cross paths with this person.
Yeah.
And so I think one aspect of that is cultivating your own personal lineage in terms of like the heroes and the visionaries that you look to for inspiration. I always said that one thing that I wanted to avoid was being asked who I looked up to or drew inspiration from and blanking. And so for that reason, I came prepared with like a list of people that I really consider a part of my own lineage. And I tried to like mix it up. There's the James Baldwin, the Audre Lorde, the Toni Morrison, but then there's also people like June Jordan that people don't think about, who, from what I've heard, almost sacrificed her relationship with Audre Lorde because of her views on Palestine and war in general. And I found that fascinating. I was like, oh, like these are two figures who figure very prominently in Black history, Black feminist history, queer history. And yet there's that tension of like, wait, like you can't be on both sides of this line when it comes to like, you know, harming people in the name of ideology or nationhood or whatever. You also have Bayard Rustin, who refused the draft and I think was imprisoned because he refused to go to war. He was such a pacifist. So that's another example of someone with like moral courage, not in a destructive way, not in a harmful way, but like not even in a confrontational way, but in a way that's like, this is what I stand for, and I know it's unpopular, but I'm gonna stay here. Nikki Giovanni is one. She's always talking about the Black middle class and bringing in those people who are assimilating into the Black middle class and sort of
Mhm.
leaving behind um, visions of what can be beyond assimilating into the Black, bourgeoisie. And so people like this, Essex Hemphill, Marlon Riggs, I loved the show Pose.
Mhm.
I loved the show Pose because I feel like growing up, I didn't have access to many sort of, um, I guess, role models, for lack of better words. Like for a long time, I didn't necessarily envision myself even living beyond like 30 because I didn't know I didn't know any queer Black people who were like grown. You look in the media and you hear a lot of advocacy, you see a lot of advocacy about queer youth. And, we still don't talk enough about queer elders and people making it through all of the struggles that we endure and still making it to the end and having a sense of self, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging in their own community. We don't hear those stories. And so for
And
me,
I think you and I sorry to interrupt. I think you and I are close in age.
Yeah, we're close to, so I'm mid 30s, so like,
Okay, we're close.
we're young, but we're not like young young.
We're becoming, yeah, we're becoming elders. It's a yesterday I was at the kickboxing gym I go to, and the owner, who's a dear friend, Jerry, was introducing me to this. She calls us baby gays if they're really young. She's like, "Oh, look at this baby gay,"
Yeah,
and I'm looking at this baby gay. He has all this facial hair, typical Gen Z style,
yeah.
and I'm thinking, baby gay. Well, how old? He has to be in his 20s at least. 18. I nearly felt
Wow.
it.
Wow.
Well, how old are you? I said, I'm 33. He said, Oh, I thought you were at least 26. I was like, Bless your heart. I was like, No, I stopped being a baby gay a long time ago. But it's this weird thing because similar to you, I also couldn't see myself.
Yeah.
Even now, like I always joke around, not joke around, I always say to people who I love, I was like, I don't want to live beyond 75. I don't want to live where I don't have my full faculties and I can't take
Mhm.
care of myself. Because as an older queer person who doesn't want children, I'm not gonna have that social safety net in the same way that my straight counterparts might if they have children.
Mhm.
I'm always like,
Yeah.
75 is a good number. I can go by 75. I don't want to go,
Yeah.
that's a decent amount of time. Like I done lived my life. I done did
Yeah.
some good. I done gave back, passed on the
Yeah.
wisdom, and now
Yeah.
I'm just chilling. That's a
Yeah.
good way for me, right? Because I didn't realize growing up there was such a lack of visibility, right? And when we talk about the power of storytelling, the power of stories to create a more inclusive world, right? Is that
Mhm.
I remember the first time I saw a queer Puerto Rican. I remember the first time I saw a queer anything on a film, right? It was
Yeah.
Mrs. Doubtfire. It was that scene in the barbershop.
Yeah.
The gay brother, Robin Williams' character, turns him into Mrs. Doubtfire
Mhm.
to Wong Fu, right? It
Yeah.
was Noah's Ark, where they introduced us to Ricky, the first queer Puerto Rican I ever
Mhm.
saw on television, right?
Mhm.
And Ricky, our similarities stop and begin at being Puerto Rican. He was hyper
Mhm.
masculine.
Yeah.
I'm a presentation, masculine and dominant in my own way. And so it's
Yeah.
really interesting navigating that, right? And
Yeah.
so there was something about not really seeing us age.
Yeah.
And then when we read about these older LGBTQ folks of color, like a Audre Lorde, like a
Mhm.
James Baldwin, oftentimes it is they don't live as long, and then for
Yeah.
various reasons. And then when we're reading from them, it's always from a historical perspective, right? It's not like, right? And I think about who are those people today? I think of Darnell Moore.
Yeah.
I think about who's a dear friend. I think about people like Janet Mock who wrote something. I think about Hari Zayad, and I think about Yolo Keely Robinson, and all these amazing folks who are writing and archiving our histories as queer folks of color and things like that. But I often, I wonder, and this is something I wanted to ask you, this is not unlisted questions, but as someone who writes quite a bit publicly,
Mhm. Mhm.
who puts yourself out there
Mhm.
professionally and personally as a writer,
Mhm.
how do you deal with the negative pushback or the naysayers?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think dealing with the sort of unsolicited criticism goes back to what we're talking about right now. Like the why of why I'm doing what I'm doing as a writer. Um,
A prolific writer, may I add.
mhm.
A prolific writer, may I add.
Thank you. Thank you. I try. But yeah, I feel like some of it is to fill a void, some of it is to leave things behind. And growing up, like you said, we don't see images of ourselves. Like even those early images that you described, Mrs. Doubtfire, and like, these images in mainstream media of maybe like gender queer folks who represent queerness for you. A lot of times those are presented to us, and the response from the people around us is laughter.
Yes.
And so there's exposure there, but there's
Yeah.
also this internalized message of like, whoa, I need to save that for some point later on in my life when I'm away from these people.
Yes.
And so this
That is
idea
such a
of
prolific
like,
point.
exactly.
I didn't even think about, I mean, I knew that in my being, but I didn't even think about it from a modern day perspective. It was like, right, like you think about Shanae from Martin, you
Yeah.
think about Medea, right? You think about
Yeah.
caricatures of gender, but you often don't get to see. And I think that's why I posed in many ways. And I couldn't get into the series as much as I wanted to. I really kept trying and I just couldn't get into it.
Hmm.
But I was proud of it for what it represented. I think it
Absolutely.
was the first time that we saw nuanced representation of trans people's
For sure.
lives
For sure.
beyond just the caricature, right? And or
For
beyond
sure.
just the freak or the odd one out. And I think there is something to be said about the power of that, right? The power of being able to see yourself reflected. And I think, in many ways, you and I were the last generation before the digital boom. And so we call ourselves the hybrid generation. We still had to know what it's like to play outside and come home before the streetlights come on. And we
Exactly.
still had to deal with dial-up and we had to learn how to type on the keyboard, right? And so we had to learn how to exist in both worlds before the
Yeah.
world became totally digital. And I thank goodness every day that I was
Yeah.
born in part of the hybrid generation because
Absolutely.
there is something to be said about knowing
Absolutely.
how to use imagination, how to play,
Yes.
how to create stories. And I think that there's such a void in creativity right now because there is a void of imagination and play and
Hmm.
joy for young
Yeah.
people to examine outside of this digital world. And so, yeah, I have to ask you this because this is getting into the nooks and crannies of some of the political stuff that we're dealing with right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up, but also recognize why is my computer doing this? So it keeps bouncing from window to window. Can you see me still?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. And so the question I have for you is, right now, America and the world at large feels like we are in one constant struggle. The ability to progress as a society and live up to the ideal that all people are created equal and have the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With so much conflict happening right now, what advice would you give to people who feel despair in this moment?
Yeah. That's such a profound question, such a timely question. I feel like the first thing would be normalize asking for help and support, which seems very, very simple. But I realized how unsimple it is or how complicated it is back when the Altadena fires happened in California. And so these organizers were raising all these funds and gathering all of these clothes and necessities for the families. And they were saying, well, we actually have enough things to pass out. The actual hurdle is getting people to come and ask for help. Nobody wants to ask for help, even though they just lost everything. What is going on? Like, are we gonna have to like drive down the street and like literally go from house to house that we see just like, in ashes and ask people like, hey, are you okay? Do you need this? Do you need that? But that's what it came down to for a lot of organizers. People wouldn't ask for help. And I think we live in such an individualistic society that becomes very taboo. It is stigmatized to admit that you're in a vulnerable situation because people take it as a moral failure. The questions start rising up of, well, how did you get in this situation? Like, what did you not do? What did you not take care of? How are you not responsible? How are you not a model citizen to end up in this situation that you're at a food bank or you're at a clothing bank or you're at the thrift store or whatever? People don't want to endure that embarrassment. But I think now of all times in this political climate, we're gonna have to get it. We're gonna have to get it together and get over that and drop the mask and realize that for some of us, the only way that we will get through is to lean on the people that love us and that we can trust.
Yeah, I haven't shared this publicly, I don't think anyways, but I'm going to share it with you because I think this is a perfect example. So the year is 2023 and I had just got laid off for the second time in 3 years.
Hmm.
God had been putting this in my heart since 2020 to go full-time creative entrepreneur. And while the professional storyteller as I know it now wasn't fully actualized back then, I knew the life I wanted to live, right? I knew that I had done the work to envision that life.
Hmm.
I remember my ex-lover said to me in year one of entrepreneurship, celebrate the small wins. And Lord, this earring won't let me be great today. Um, And what I realized, y'all, this is real life. Authenticity is a daily choice. My hoop just fell off for those who are not watching the video, and I am putting it back in, and I'm struggling. But the point of the story I'm telling y'all is that in 2023, I had started my entrepreneurship journey with $0 in my savings.
Hmm.
I had very limited credit because I had debt,
Hmm.
and I did not know how I was
Hmm.
going to make it work. And I had just moved to Atlanta that fall. It was September. I'm sorry, I had moved to Atlanta in 2021, got laid off from my job. That started me on this whole journey.
Hmm.
And I remember in the end of 2021, going to 2022, I had gotten this sublet, which actually now is my one bedroom apartment full time, but it originally was a sublet.
Hmm.
And I remember my contract with Home Depot's DEI communications contract was just about to end. And I didn't know how I was going to cover February's rent.
Hmm.
And one of my best friends, Josh, and his husband, Paul, who live in Australia, who's from Australia originally, but we met in California, they were like, "Hey, Mark, we think you're meant to be in Atlanta. We're going to pay for your February rent. We're going to loan you the money. You can just pay us back when you can." And I said,
Hmm.
"Okay, thanks." And then within the first few weeks of moving into the apartment, I got a part-time consulting contract. And then
Wow.
I just kept going from there, right? And I remember it was 2023. And I was scared. I was, operating from a deficit, and
Yeah.
I knew what my purpose was. I've always had a deep knowing. Okay, this earring won't let me be great. I've always had a deep knowing of my purpose, and
Yeah.
so, what I came to realize was I had a lot of shame because I grew up really poor,
Hmm.
like below the poverty threshold. And I remember in 2023, trying to figure out my next steps and realizing I don't know how I'm going to feed myself, right? And so I
Hmm.
applied for food stamps. And I've actually never shared this story publicly because I think of all the shame I felt, but I think you really hit something hit a nerve for me when you were like, we need to talk about that openly. It's not a moral failure, right? And so, but growing up as someone whose mother had to rely on food stamps to provide for us, there was a lot of shame around taking the food stamp cart and going to the corner store and getting some stuff for the
Hmm.
right. There was a lot of shame of like I remember having distinct memories as a child of like sliding the EBT card from
Hmm.
the counter discreetly so that people around me didn't know that's how I was paying for stuff.
Hmm.
And I don't know why or when in my childhood I internalized that being poor was shameful.
Hmm.
But as I approached entrepreneurship for the first year, and I was like, I gotta feed myself, right? And so I
Yeah.
took a food stand for a little bit. I was literally only on it for like a month and a half or two before things took off, and I was not even eligible for it at that point.
Yeah.
Very lucky that like I had it when I had it because I needed it, and now
Yeah.
I'm building my business, right? And I always say there would be no year. 2023 was the year of me. Every year I pick a word. That year was me. And
Mm.
there would be no year of me without the we.
Hmm.
There are people all over the world, literally, who poured into me, who supported me, who told me, "I believe in you. Here's that airfare money you need to get to creating change. Here's this you need to do this. Here's to pay us back when you can. Do this. We believe in you." And I am a product of communal love and communal care.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's why I'm able to pour back into others the way I am because I'm being poured into.
Absolutely.
That's not a moral failure, right? I think a lot of people they want to get caught up on oh, blah 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 blah. We have this perception or this image of who they are. Listen, I'm very much a Jersey boy. I'm very much from the hood. I'm very much first gen, very much all you get with that, right? Like all that
Mhm.
that comes with, right? And I'm proud of that. And I can be in rooms with millionaires and elites and hold my own, right? There is no
Yeah.
contradiction. I am all of myself in every space
Yeah.
I enter
Yeah.
because that's a daily choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you, as someone who, because you gave me introverted vibes, I don't know if you're introverted.
Yeah. I'm slightly on the more introverted side.
I could totally see that. And so, how did you find refuge in the pen or in writing? How did you get to become from the more introverted self to now this public figure that people can read your thoughts and opinions and share parts of your lived experience with you? Like, how did you go from being the more introverted one to now becoming this public figure?
That's a great question. Wow.
That was on the list of questions, but it just came to me and I was like, I have to ask that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic question. I think most introverted writers would say that writing is like an outlet for them and like that's how they sort of process. For me, I think that is a bit true, but I think also going back to what I said earlier, people sort of always sense like a caretaker vibe with me. And so oftentimes when you read things that I've written, it comes from knowing someone who's been through that thing and having supported someone who's been through that thing. And so the deeper I get into their story, the more I realize, like, oh, this problem is actually even bigger than this person. This is something that's collective. When we talk about the shame of poverty, for example, people will talk about the moral failure of being the alleged moral failure of being poor on a personal level. What about the collective moral failure of not having a safety net?
Mm,
So much of people's stress, even to the point of becoming suicidal or being suicidal, is connected to not having food, not having shelter, living in a society that stigmatizes asking for help. And so it's like sometimes I feel like if I don't write about these things, and I don't want to come across as like a savior mentality, but if I don't write about these things, people may truly feel like they're the only ones going through it. And that could lead them down a road where it's just the end for them. And I've seen that, unfortunately, quite a bit where people really were convinced that they were the only ones going through a situation that they didn't have necessarily the exposure, enough exposure to know, like, actually, this is a systemic problem. This is a structural problem. I just don't have the language for this to know, or like the data to back it up, or, the poll, the survey that like says that, 56% of queer Black youth are blah, 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 blah. But it's not just them. It's not just you. It's not just me. Um, and so I think that is what pushed me past that point of like, oh, like I just want to be like sort of in my own bubble to myself and like, live a life that's more private and, away from scrutiny. It's like, no, the scrutiny that I may feel when putting myself out in the world is nothing compared to the hardship that people feel when they're moving through a world that is erasing their existence, that is silencing them, that is turning away very callously when they have nothing to fall back on and no one to lean on. So it kind of helped me get over myself to lean into other people's stories.
yeah, I love that. And I have to ask you this question, which is a great segue because you kind of alluded to it in that in the comment you just made around, and I'm gonna put it in the chat box as well. Trans and non-binary people and gender non-conforming people like ourselves
Hmm.
are under attack. Back in the 1960s and 70s, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera dealt with gay and lesbian people, telling them to shut the fuck up. When they began talking about trans, sadly, 55 years later, a lot of people within the LGBTQ plus community still hold a level of disgust, and I use that word intentionally here,
Hmm.
disgust and apathy towards our trans and gender expansive siblings. How do we manage the intercommunal conflict that is occurring right now?
Yeah, I think part of it is knowing trans history, and we're at a moment where like history is being erased and distorted and denied, and like our access to it is being obstructed. And I don't necessarily mean like burying yourself in like a history textbook per se. I'm talking about like basic things like Wikipedia, like going to Wikipedia, Googling some of these like historical figures, people who don't know who our basic queer and trans ancestors are. Like it's mind-boggling, but they're not learning it in school. They're not learning it at home. They're not learning it in the media. And so we have to keep passing it down. But it's the people who are, most on the margins, most marginalized, who are always the ones to make society progress. and even me as someone who's non-binary, but still like cis presenting, sometimes I include that caveat, like, yes, I am non-binary, but I'm also cis presenting. And there is, some, I would say, like, danger that has been posed by me coming off as feminine in some ways, but it is not nearly as much as people who, are, assigned male at birth clearly, but presenting in a very, very overtly feminine way.
Yeah.
And I cannot talk about um, having all of the privileges that I have and crediting myself for all these things that I'm doing without giving credit where credit is due. And credit is always due to the people who are most marginalized, who are most hypervisible and invisible at the same time, to the people who are silenced the most, to the people, when you're in the grocery store and the parents are sort of like guiding their kids away from this trans person and like trying to make them invisible. Like, those are the folks who are often
Yeah.
pushed to the limit on top of living in a society like we've been discussing with no social safety net. It's especially intense for them because they're seen as undeserving of anything, period.
Our full humanity, and I think,
Yeah,
it's interesting because you and I have the inverse. I am a cisgender identifying person who is very femme presenting.
yeah,
I identify as gender nonconforming, and while I recognize that a lot of people put me in the trans umbrella, I'm
yeah.
very mindful of speaking out about my cis positionality because I don't have to endure the
Yeah,
medical industrial complex in the same way,
got
right?
you. Yeah.
I don't need access to gender affirming care. I don't need access to, things that are going to help me change my documents and have the world view me for who I say I am, right? I am.
Hmm.
Yet that doesn't dissolve me of experiencing bathroom harassment, having to be hyper vigilant because I'm being threatened for violence, having cis men fetishize me because of my
Yeah,
having, dealing with being called slurs in the street of maybe
yeah.
all the country and even around the world. I've been attacked and slurred verbally. And so despite not having to navigate the world as a trans person,
Hmm.
right? The very perception of who I am forces me to navigate a world where they would rather erase my existence,
Yeah,
both physically and
yeah.
figuratively speaking and literally speaking, right? And so there is something to be said about daring to be ourselves in a world that is hell-bent on erasing us.
Yeah, yeah. I'm often in rooms with Black feminists who are cis women, and they're often very curious, like, well, how did you get into Black feminism? Like, you're someone who, yeah, I know you're queer, but like, you seem like you could pass as like, cis, maybe even straight in some context. Like, I'm not understanding what led you to this side. And I
Mhm.
always tell them, every single instance of homophobia that I've ever experienced in my life was about gender. I never had anyone follow me down the street, yell at me on the train about who I was sleeping with or mention sexual acts or anything like that. All of that stopped in maybe middle school, when it was cool to like, joke about inappropriate things. In adulthood, all of the queer phobia that I've experienced has been about this perceived violation of gender norms. So you cannot address queer phobia without addressing transphobia, because that is the primary reason why cis people are coming from you. In their minds, that's not delineated and that's not straight.
Yeah.
They think
Yeah.
they're coming for you because, oh, you sleep with men and blah, blah, blah. But
But
what
I also
actually
speak with
cued
women.
it, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like I also, I mean, this is I can't even say this publicly, but like I also sleep with women, right? And like not always, and not often is a very particular kind of woman, but
Yeah.
I'm very much queer, right? And I think it's so interesting when people look at someone's gender expression or perceive sexuality based on appearance.
Ooh.
And those two different things, I mean, I have women who have told me I've never been with a feminine gay man, queer man before, but like that experience with you was amazing, right? And it's because there is something about someone who is so short and who he is,
Yeah.
I'm extremely attractive, right? In
Yeah.
many ways, right? And
And
no,
energy.
that energy, right? I'm very much if I'm aggressive, right? And I share that because I think that a lot of times people conflate sexuality with gender and they can't separate the two. And for me, my queerness is not just a sexual or gender disposition, it's also my politic.
Hmm.
I refuse to conform to heteronormative ways of being in all areas of my life. So if I'm a queer feminine man who occasionally wants to sleep with a cis woman who's bisexual or queer, I'm going to. If
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
want to have sex with me, right? If
Yeah.
I'm a queer man who dates trans men, I'm going to talk about that openly without shame.
Yeah.
So there is power in naming who we are and claiming who we are and refusing to allow our narratives to be reduced down to just a statistic around violence and marginalization and exploitation and poverty and disproportionate marginalization.
Mhm.
Because we're more than that, right? We're
We're
more
more than that. Yeah.
than
And
that.
we're also just like to the cis folks who are queer out there, like queer people, we're also more than the crumbs of like validation that we get from
Mm.
assimilating and appearing to be respectable. Like, I know there are people who get crumbs of respect from their parents, from their aunties, from their uncles.
You're not that kind of gay,
Yeah,
you're
not that type of
acceptable
gay.
gay.
And people say that when they come out, like, oh, like, I'm queer, but like not like them, and not the makeup and not the dresses and not the purses to try to like offset all of the
Yeah,
scrutiny. But it's like the moment you get lumped in with the people you're trying to disaffiliate from, like
yeah,
you're at stake. Like you
yeah.
become a target. And you never know when that's gonna happen. You never know when
There's
it's gonna
no
happen.
amount of trade that's gonna.
No amount of trade. And the saddest part is you never know how far someone will take it. You
Mm.
never know if they're doing it just to like get that homophobia out of their system for the day, or if they're like literally about to unalive you. Like I've had moments of queerphobia where I'm like, is this it? Like, y'all don't see this? Like I might need like I'm looking for a security guard or somebody, and here I am, an abolitionist, not even like, supporting the carceral system. But I'm like, it's feeling so desperate in this moment, and I'm feeling so closed in that like I don't know what this person's about to do. And so in those moments, I think queer people got to realize like it's trans folks who deal with this every day.
Yeah, every day.
Every
And
day.
we wouldn't have the rights we have now and the progress that we made had it not been for trans folks,
Absolutely.
the non-conforming folks, and the sissies and the cross-dressers, as they would say back,
Absolutely.
daring to be themselves. Because you know what, Araya, what I would never understand is what is it about me and my comfort in my own skin that you are so disgusted by that you would be moved to violence? That to me baffles my mind. Now, I've had straight men come up to me thinking that I was a woman and flirt with me. And then I say, "Hi, my name is Mark." And then they realize that I'm a man. And some of them are like, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. I thought you were a woman." And they just kind of like quickly walk away because they're embarrassed. Then I've had some guys be like, "Oh, I didn't realize you were a man, but I'm down with it."
Mhm.
Pardon me, sir. No thanks. And then I have those who thought that somehow I had tricked them.
Yes.
Bro, I was just minding my own damn business, looking cute. You came up to me because you were attracted to me, and
That
your
part.
attraction to me
Yeah.
is not my problem. You being attracted to someone's femininity in a male body, embodied way that is feminine is not my problem. And
Yeah.
whatever that evokes in you, whatever that brings up for you, is for you to figure out.
Yeah.
But too often, those folks are the ones that turn to violence because
Yeah.
they cannot rationalize, excuse me, their attraction to someone like me.
Hmm.
World around them tells them this is what it means to be a straight man. This is what it means,
Hmm.
right? And there are, and especially living in Atlanta, I see it all the time. I meet guys all the time, and because of my gender and sexuality background, I'll have questions with them like, "Listen,
Yeah.
you're a black man in the South. I know it's harder for you, it's more complicated, but why
Yeah.
do you feel this way?" Or, and I've had these conversations with these men, oftentimes from the apps, and they'll look at me and they're like, I'm discreet. No one needs to know that I sleep with trans women or femme men or men in general. And I said, okay, I understand that. But there's a difference between discretion and feeling the need to hide who you are.
Hide. Yeah.
And a lot of them say to me, like, if I were to come out, my family would disown me, or I would lose opportunities, or my friend group would change or disown me, or I would feel more vulnerable because suddenly the very group of people that I was also attacking, I am now a part of.
And that's the disconnect for me. Sorry. This is the last part, is
Yeah.
when people say the quiet part out loud and they fully understand what's at stake. Because when you ask them, well, why don't you associate with this group of people that you seem to be so attracted to? They can name all of the disadvantages and all of the setbacks that would come by openly affiliating with, trans folks. But then they can't envision how they should be standing up for trans folks so that they don't experience those things firsthand on a daily basis
Yeah.
unfairly. It's like you get it, but you can't stretch it far enough to see that you actually need to be advocating for these folks.
Right. Because if we are liberated from being attacked and all that, you all become
Yeah.
liberated, right? It's
Yeah.
like, I always say if the most marginalized person in the community is taken care of, then most people will be taken care of, or everybody will be taken care of, right? Because it is about meeting the need of the most marginalized, and by default, you're meeting the needs of the people in the community.
Hmm.
I have to ask you this last question. I know we're over time and we had tech issues, and I want to honor your time, and I'm so grateful that you exist in this. I'm grateful to exist in your orbit. That you even know who I am
Likewise.
on a micro level. Like it's just like, oh my
Uh,
God, you're me.
likewise.
And so, what do you hope to shift in society through your work, Araya?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've been talking about this entire conversation, helping people step into their authenticity and helping them realize that yes, risks come with that, setbacks come with that, but there is more to be gained by standing in solidarity with other people who are also standing in their truth and their authenticity than, masking who you are, compartmentalizing yourself, shrinking yourself, you know, stifling yourself, muzzling yourself. Like these aren't helpful to the collective. And I think part of that is helping people also overcome this mindset of individualism where they can't see beyond the risks that are involved for them and only them.
Yeah.
Like you said, when the most marginalized is taken care of, everyone gets taken care of. And why is that? Because to even care or empathize with the most marginalized, who you're taught deserves nothing, you have to get beyond yourself. And I think getting people beyond themselves is like sort of a through line in all my work is like helping people realize, look, this could be you. It's not right now, but who's to say that it won't ever be you, that you won't ever have a queer or trans child, that you yourself won't come to the realization that you are queer or trans, that your
Yeah.
parent might turn around one day and say, hey, I gotta sit down with you and give you the news that like I'm going through a transition. These things that are a part of life are so unpredictable, and I think people are so convinced that it won't be them until it is. And we're better off prepared by realizing that it can always be us.
Always be us.
Can
Yeah.
always be us.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much for accepting my invite. Thank you for the amazing work you do and for existing the way you do in this world. I always say, the stories we tell can be a window or a mirror. And I know
Mhm.
that the stories you tell are oftentimes are mirrors for folks who can see themselves, and a window of understanding for those who really want to understand, empathize, and be allies. And also thank you for your work in the mental health field. We know that Black and Brown youth who are LGBTQ are 2 times more likely to uh, die by suicide than
Mhm.
their white LGBT counterparts.
Mhm.
And I always say that I always thought I had decent mental health care until I moved to Atlanta and I realized, oh, this is what culturally competent
Yeah.
is like, right?
Yeah.
Where you don't have to explain why you talk so fast or culturally
Mhm.
why you're loud or like it's just like there was a cultural competency that I received in my care here in Atlanta that I haven't got anywhere else. And
Exactly.
at least not the degree in which I've gotten it. And so I thank you. Thank you for sharing part of your story with us today. Thank you for being a guest. How can folks connect with you?
Yeah, so across social media, my handles are just my name. So you can always find me that way. You can go to my website, which is also just my name, arayabaker.com. Yeah, and that's how I'm available to folks. I'm also on LinkedIn, so feel free to add me there or check out my work for updates there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Be well and be sure to check out The Shift on Select Tuesdays and wherever you stream your podcast or watch your video if you do YouTube. We have a lot more conversations coming up in the rest of the year, and I'm super, super excited for folks to hear this episode with Araya. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, follow the podcast, The Shift, Stories of Resilience, Resistance and Resilience, wherever you listen to your podcast or watch on YouTube. Thank you so much for being here. Take care and be sure to support Araya's work.